Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Librarians of Anarchy. And with me are anarchists Rod Smith.
Hello, bring my anarchy t-shirt on today. Go on, Jimmy.
Jimmy, you've lost a run of yourself, Rods. A natural-born anarchist, Declan Doyle.
Fortnite.
Yeah. And me, Sean Murray, and my major act of anarchy. Well, I refused to eat supper one night this week. So yeah. So messing with my bit edgy lads, edgy. How's your week been? Oh, I know, Deck. I was looking to get out of bed the following day.
Biscuits, quick.
Sugar.
Been a good week.
How's the week been, Deck?
Pretty good.
Were you just for any listeners or watchers who aren't aware, Deck does Viking reenactments, and were you off this week doing one?
It was up in Slane. It was the biggest reenactment in Ireland this year. So it was quite good. There was two types of battles going on. It was Western style and Eastern style. I did the Western. So there was about 60 of us on the battlefield, and the Eastern was about 80 to 100. So there was good battles, good huge village, lovely weather. Couldn't be better.
Fantastic. And any injuries?
No, thank God.
Excellent. Back in one piece. That's why we like it.
That is vital because we're off to Iceland now in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Iceland National Day. So we're going over, the stream is going over for the big festival over there as well. More killing.
Super.
Great crack.
Excellent. And is there many from Ireland going?
Three.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
A bit of a job getting there. But should be good.
And are the Icelandics big into it?
Oh, very much so. Their culture is based heavily on it. And the Icelandics treat their history with proper adornment, you know. They teach the sagas in school. It's all well done. They're very involved. The group we're going to see are called Rimmiger, and there's a lot of them in it, you know. Well, so it's a big culture over there, more so than here, you know.
Fantastic.
Good, it'll be good.
Brilliant. How was your week, Rods?
Yes, I was over in Wales for the rugby, for the final that Leinster did not make, and went to Richard Burton's hometown, Fordlandia, where we did a week.
Well said.
Very, very interesting. His 100th anniversary is this year now, so there's going to be a couple of events. So any Richard Burton fans, head over. It's only down the road from a place called Port Talbot, so well worth a visit.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, did you go there?
Well,
did you go to Port Talbot?
Very good.
And yourself,
I wonder tomorrow will they do another reenactment of his multiple weddings to Liz Taylor. Might be a goal to have just one last one.
Yeah, why not?
Apparently, when he was married to Elizabeth Taylor, she would come over to Wales. She wouldn't stay in the fancy hotels. She would come into Richard Burton's hometown, and they would stay with relations there. So they were very much, feet on the ground, very sensible people.
Okay, very good. Or feet in the pub. Feet on the ground or in the pub, I'd say one or the other. Yeah.
The
pub. Brilliant. Okay, let's move it, lads. So this week, Decky, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry. Now, I came across this thing during the week. I'd never heard of it before. Fascinating stuff. Again, there's loads of comparables you can make nowadays with certain individuals, which we go along with. You guess what I'm talking about with the name of the place? It's a city in the Amazon, and it's called Fordlandia.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, Fordlandia was the brainchild of Henry Ford. It sits in the Amazon rainforest. It was built in 1928. Essentially, he wanted to control the supplies of his raw materials. So he'd have control over it. He'd already captured aluminium and various other aspects of the car. But one thing he was short on was controlling the supply of rubber. The British had a monopoly on rubber in Sri Lanka, which was where it's predominantly grown. industrially. So he was banking on them, but he wanted to be independent of any of that, you know. So rubber trees did come from Brazil. Now, this is where it gets a bit messy. So he went down to Brazil, garnered a team, and decided he was building a city in the rainforest. And it was to be called Fordlandia. Now, by December, it was built. It was bought quite cheap off the Brazilian government, and large area. So it had to be stripped of all the wood. He was hoping to sell the wood to pull back some of his costs, but the wood he got out of it was basically useless. So that was a bad start, you know. It got worse from here on out. But anyway, the city was built. Americans were working in it, and a lot of the locals. They introduced a few things which the locals weren't hugely keen on. One of them was, Ford being what he was, he didn't want anyone drinking, smoking, any of that crack. He had a kind of patriarchal idea of his employees, you know, and their moral fibre. So booze wasn't allowed, or fags, or any of that crack. Fun stuff. He also introduced them to garbage food. They were only getting porridge in the mornings, and something similar in the afternoons with a bit of bread. So it was kind of Spartan for them. He also introduced the clocking system. That didn't get down well either. And if you were late, apparently you went to work for the day. Now, this all started bubbling up underneath the surface. And in December 1930, one of the supervisors, Kay Ostenfield, started having a scrap with a lad called Manuel Catano. And it escalated further and further. A lot of workers joined on the side of Catano, and a riot broke out. So they started vandalising the city, homes, factories, the whole lot. They had hospitals, schools. It was a proper city for all the employees. But a riot broke out and they started trashing the place. Management escaped on boats and they sent in the Brazilian army. That all calmed down after a while, and a gentleman by the name of Archibald Johnson became the manager. He kind of turned the town around, repaired it, got everyone back to normal. Everything was fine again. But they also wanted to build another place up further upstream, and they called that Balterra. Now, the rubber plantations they were building, they didn't really fully appreciate what they were doing. Rubber grew in the wild all over the place, and it gave forward latex and rubber, what was needed for tires. Where it grew in the wild, it was surrounded by other plants, other trees, which also gave the effect of keeping them safe, parasites, rot, the whole lot, as any kind of biosystem would work, you know. So they didn't do any of that. So they just stripped out the fields and planted them in very neat rows, but very, very close to each other. What happened was parasites arrived. Mold, mildew, everything. Air wasn't going through. There was nothing in its proper environment that was being applied. So the plants weren't producing rubber. They were dying out all over the place. So it all got the pot. So it was then, I have more notes. This went on for about 10 years. The war kind of helped a bit because they needed a lot of rubber for the war effort. So the bit they were producing, which wasn't in what they'd hoped, was still keeping them going. But then after the war died, Henry Ford kind of fell into ill health. So it was taken over by his grandson, Henry Ford II. He decided to abandon the whole place altogether because it wasn't working out. Trees weren't producing. There was still trouble within the area. There's a lot of people involved. So he abandoned the whole thing and sold it back to the Brazilian government. Now, it's still there. There's about 3,000 people living in it. It basically has been abandoned by the Brazilian government, Ford, everybody. So it's in ruins. But the people who are still living there are maintaining it as well as they could. I seen a documentary of a while ago. There was one elderly lady. There was two types of buildings involved. There was the villas, which was for the management, and then there was the huts there for the workers. But this lady managed to get herself one of the villas, and she's living in there. It was originally designed for Henry Ford II, the grandson. It's amazing. The luxury involved, because this would have been top-notch stuff. Parquet floors are there. Everything's amazing. And she's living there on her own. Hasn't paid a penny in rent since the 30s. There's still 3,000 people living there. There has been a revival to some degree of people going back into the city, but it hasn't really taken off as such. There's moves to try and have it created as a heritage area because of its history. So there's a lot of work to be done on it. In 2008, there was an Icelandic composer called Jóhann Jóhannsson. He composed, he did an album based on the city itself. So it hasn't fallen into complete disregard to regard the future, you know. So it's still there, but it's a fascinating place. But again, it just ran into ruin because it wasn't fully thought out. And that's my little story for today.
Well, very interesting. Yeah.
The place to go.
And actually, that album, that Johansson album, actually, I've heard it. It's decent music as well. I didn't fully understand actually the context of it now. I didn't realize there was an actual place called Fordlandia. So it's worth a listen to. Johansson. Yeah, it's quite powerful stuff. Definitely worth a listen.
Well, Fordlandia, that's a place to visit. A little bit of history, there. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Well, how big is it?
Oh, it's huge. It's a city.
Wow.
You know, like I was watching the thing. They're on the 4th generation of people that are still living there.
Okay.
So people have a tight history to it. They're still using some of the machinery in it, but for their own uses. Not for the use of making cars, obviously, but they're using them for repairs around the whole city. There's a lot of tradesmen still there who passed it on to their next generation. So there's a lot of tradesmen still there.
Okay, so they're kind of self-sufficient in their own little bubble there.
Oh, it has its own generators, produces its own electricity. It's a self-sustaining city.
Wow.
Well.
Yeah, it's mad. But if you compare it now to the likes of Brownsville in Texas, where Elon Musk is taking over, basically.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I see that turned out too bad for him either. The locals aren't happy.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Declan. Rod, what have you got for us this week?
Right, I'm going to go back to ancient Roman history, chaps, for this one, for a bit of a change, and an emperor that nobody has ever heard of called Elagabulus. So Elagabulus was born in Syria, roughly about 200 years after the birth of Christ, and he was a high priest. So what happened was there were the usual ructions and politics in Rome, where you had the emperors not being popular and people were voting against them. And anyway, Elagabulus's grandmother, who was a very clever woman, decided to claim that Elagabulus was the illegitimate son of a previous emperor and that he should be in charge. So the army said, yeah, fair enough. The guy we have at the moment isn't that great. So at the age of 14, Elagabulus became emperor. Now, he's a very dramatic character, and he brought a black meteorite rock with him, and he declared that this rock was a god, and everybody should worship this god. So he would walk in procession, and this rock would be carried by horses, and he would walk in front of the rock and walk backwards facing the rock as they're going, to show reverence. And he wanted all of the Romans to show reverence to this rock. Of course, then the Romans were thinking, holy sweet Moses, what have we let ourselves in for here, letting this guy take over? Then he built a big, huge temple and put the rock in it, and basically said, right, lads, that's where you go now to worship this rock. He was famous for, he dressed very flamboyantly. He liked to wear silken robes dusted in gold. He brought a lot of Syrian ceremonies and customs to Rome as well, which they weren't expecting. And he was married 5 times. Now, bear in mind, he was only 14 when he took over as emperor, and he lasted 4 years. And in that time, he was married 5 times. Once he married a Vestal Virgin, and that's a bit like marrying somebody who's a nun, because Vestal Virgins were ones who would remain chaste for at least 30 years. But he said, as he was a divine emperor, he had the right to marry whoever he was. So he married this Vestal Virgin, then got rid of her, married a few other people, and then came back and married the Vestal Virgin again. He also he liked to wear women's clothes. Apparently, so I know it sounds like a Monty Python song or something, but no, he liked to wear women's clothes and liked to be called apparently Empress in private. So and was apparently, and again, this hasn't been proven, was inquiring at the time of Roman physicians to see if they could actually change his sex because he wanted to be a woman. So that seems to be why the Roman history has scrubbed this person from history. He was a bit of a joker. His palace was like a bit of a nightclub, and what he would do was he would have parties and he would play tricks. He would invite senior people to banquets, and they would sit on these air cushions. And then as they were eating their meal, they would deflate the air cushions, so they started to go down in the seat like that, not realizing it was part of a trick. He would have leopards and lions released into the banquets as well, which definitely put the fears up a few people. He would have fake banquets where there would be food, everybody would be invited, and the food would be made of wood or wax, and people would have to laugh at this joke. And there was also apparently a time where they would pour lots and lots of rose petals from the ceiling down onto the people at the banquet, and legend has it that some people were actually suffocated because of the volume of rose petals that were being dropped upon them. So at this stage, he is in power a couple of years, and the army and the Senate are kind of questioning, listen, is this the right person that really should be in charge? So the Roman Praetorian was like the secret, I suppose, the equivalent of the American president's Secret Service. And so they were definitely very, very reluctant to continue supporting this guy. So the grandmother, whose name was Julia, who was responsible for getting him on the throne in the first place, was also thinking, oh, this mightn't have been the best choice. She had another grandson called Alexander, who was a lot quieter and less controversial. And she started saying, well, listen, maybe Alexander should be the co-emperor. So Elagabalus wasn't happy with this, and he plotted to get rid of Alexander. So we're now talking, he's at the age of 18 now. So the granny and the Praetorian Guard are going, enough is enough. So Elagabalus was invited to the local barracks to say, listen, let's resolve this co-emperor discussion and let's work something out. But it was a trap. He was attacked by his guards, and legend has it that he clung to his mother's clothes as they were both killed by the Praetorian Guard. They were beheaded, dragged through the streets of Rome, and thrown into the river Tiber. And that was the ultimate insult that you could pay to any person of Roman vintage. And then they passed a law basically to cancel him. So cancel culture existed even then. All of his statues were smashed. Any coins with his faces on it, they were erased and removed. And he was remembered not just as chaotic, but as radically religious, a gender rebel, a joker, and I suppose ultimately a misunderstood teenager. Bear in mind, he was only 14 when he came to the throne, and he was only 18 when he lost the throne. So literally, at the peak of his teenage years, he was put in charge of a Roman Empire. So anyway, Alexander took over and was a lot more sensible and stable. And it's only in recent times that Elagabalus has been rediscovered by historians who realize how much he was erased from history. So there you go, a bit of a character, to say the least.
That's insane.
The original zany prankster.
The original zany prankster who liked to cross-dress, and apparently he also liked to go into brothels and dress up as a woman in a brothel and pretend to be a prostitute. And he would pay then people to say, listen, I want to pretend to be a prostitute and dress as a woman, and I'm going to pay you now to treat me as if I'm a prostitute in a brothel. So all these different stories about him coming out.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay.
He's only a kid.
Only a kid. Only a kid, yeah.
All through his phases.
Yeah.
God.
So top that one, Chandler. Top that one.
I'm struggling there now. Actually, I'm gonna finish the show now. Thank you very much, Rodney. Okay, mine's quite conservative compared to that. I am going to talk about Ireland in the 1950s, and a little bit of sectarianism, and a little bit of the church, the courts, and just the general craziness of Ireland at the time. In December 1941, a chap called Ernest Tilson, he was 24. He wanted to marry an 18-year-old girl called Mary Barnes. Now, he was Protestant and she was Catholic, and she was also pregnant at the time. So they were under, given it was Ireland, they were under a little bit of pressure to tie the knot. So they agreed themselves to go Catholic with it, but the Catholic Church, and particularly the local priest, this is around Haddington Road, he insisted that they sign a prenup, an agreement that any kids that they bore would be brought up Catholic. And after a little bit of a merry-go-round, they finally got there. So they got married in the Catholic Church, much to the dismay of Mary's mother, who was a devout Catholic, that she was marrying a Protestant. Anyway, as it went, they went on to have 4 kids in total. And all this during their early marriage, during this time with the 4 kids, they were living with Mary's mom in the area, which couldn't have been pleasant for a new couple. So they became a little bit estranged, and in 1950, Ernest decided up sticks. But before he did, and maybe have a go at the mother-in-law, he took 3 of the boys and put them into a Protestant orphanage in Dunleary because he wanted them raised Protestant. We'll have more about this a bit later on. Mary, not happy. Mary's mother, very unhappy. They eventually got to the High Court, who found to get the kids back and to get them raised as Catholic. And the High Court found with Mary, but there was an odd judge in there, Judge Garrett, who went round and round the houses to make sure he got the case because he wanted to be responsible for a big judgment. And also it had become quite a story of national UK, even interest in the States. And he signed the kids back to Mary on the constitutional article relating to the power of the Catholic Church, or the special place of the Catholic Church. That stoked up all sorts of shit, as you can imagine, among Protestants, and it was challenged in the Supreme Court. Now, the legal fees for these cases were massive, but they were paid for on each side by both the Protestant and the Catholic Church, so it was a big, big deal. Supreme Court found with Mary again on the basis of equality, and that if they had both signed, they both agreed that Ernest couldn't, under equality, that would have to take the 2 of them to unagree, basically. So Mary won that case as well. Things got a little uncomfortable for Ernest, and he scarpered out to the family home in Oldcastle in Meath. And shortly after the Supreme Court case, they were subjected to quite a little bit of intimidation, stoked by the local priest, an 80-year-old Father Farrell, and very Father Ted-esque. There was protests outside the family home, people with L1s doing the rosary for hours on end. There was a lad came back from the pub every single evening for a year and a half, who sang Faith of Our Fathers. It was just very Father Ted-esque kind of protests, although they were threatened to be burned out of house and home. And more importantly, they had a dressmaking business that was boycotted by all the Catholics in the town. So it was messy. Eventually, after a year and a half of this intimidation, it kind of stopped because Ernest's sister Mitty was the local dressmaker, and there was no one to make the Holy Communion dresses for the kids. So the Catholics kind of stopped the protests, ironically, to get their to get their communion dresses made. Now, Ernest up and left. He just couldn't take the attention, and he wanted to also protect his family from the intimidation. So he eventually went to Belfast and on to London. Sorry, excuse me. I think I'm sitting on something here. And so he eventually ended up in London. And it became, it's kind of a famous case. The priest, Father O'Farrell, like, he was a bit of a dick. He was he boycotted Protestant school fates and jumble sales, and so it became a bit of a little civil war in the town of Oldcastle. But anyway, in the heat of the hunt, after all this, no one came out a winner. Poor old Ernest, who had originally lost his job, was eventually got a little bit funded by the Protestant Church to move, to go to Belfast and then on to London, whereas Mary herself was without any state help, tried to raise four boys on her own. And a weird twist in the story, Ernest, when his dad died, Ernest came back to Ireland in 1964, so this is 13 years after the case, and went into a local pub in Ballsbridge near Haddington, and he bumped into his father-in-law, or his ex-father-in-law, as the case may be, and his father-in-law convinced him to go and see the boys. So he went to visit the boys and got a bit of a frosty reception from Mary, but he kind of kept it going for a few months, and eventually him and Mary actually got back together again. The two of them up sticks and moved to London with the four boys, and eventually away from all the noise, and eventually moved back to Dublin in 1990. And they both died around the mid-90s. So and on his deathbed, he kind of said, he wished he'd never taken the case if he had known of all the hysteria it was going to cause. But there you go. So it's kind of a strangely happy ending to a bizarre tale about Ireland in the 1950s, and this it was a massive case at the time.
Wow. It's got to go back together again at the end after all that they'd been through. Wow.
That's insane, that part as well.
Yeah.
I don't know who else would have them. Who else would have either of them after all that? So
wow.
The gas. That was I was reading up on this, and I wasn't expecting that part of it. Very, very unusual tale, but it's just goes to show how strong the Catholic Protestant stance was at the time. But it's seeped right into society and people's actions and responses.
It's amazing how much time and effort people put into judging others, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Like, what? Like, they're trying to raise a family with a protest group outside the house. Just because they exist.
Yeah.
Do you know? Purely for that reason alone. Their existence upsets people. Ergo, down you go. What?
Yeah, it was mad, but there was everyone wanted to be involved. The Archbishop of Dublin said everyone was claiming influence on it, and trying to make a name for themselves out of this case. The judge, the Archbishop, even the Church of Ireland as well. It was just there was a lot of figures involved in this who hopped on the bandwagon.
I mean, all these poor innocent children are the ones being
back as a result of as a result of standard marital difficulties and an annoying mother-in-law. There you go.
Standard, really. Nowadays.
Absolutely.
No, I'd say I'd never had any problems with my mother-in-law.
No comment. Yeah, who's going to throw themselves under the bus here? Super. Okay, lads. I think that's us for this week. That was brilliant. Thank you very much for your company as always, lads. And thank you very much for listening at home. Take care and have a good week.
Okay, we'll see you again, folks. Bye-bye.
Happy bank holiday.